This critique analyzes a broadcast script that heavily criticizes a rival network, Channel 12, for framing Israeli military and intelligence achievements against Iran as strategic failures rather than historic successes.
And jumping right in, a compelling critique dismantles the opponent's strongest argument rather than simply dismissing it outright.
Right, exactly. Because while the author's material makes this really strong case for highlighting those operational successes, there are definitely distinct opportunities here to fortify the underlying argument.
Yeah, for sure. If we look closely at how the author sets this up, they actually zero in on a very specific quote from Channel 12.
Oh, the tactical versus strategic thing.
Yes, exactly. The idea that Israel might have achieved, tactical successes that led to a strategic defeat.
Right.
And the weakness here is that the script just kind of mocks that assertion without actually disproving it within the text. I mean, they list all these significant tactical wins, like the degradation of proxy networks, the strikes on nuclear sites, intelligence superiority.
Yeah, it's a very long list.
It is, but then they just declare them to be strategic victories without logically bridging that gap.
It kind of reminds me of watching a basketball coach aggressively bragging about hitting the most three-pointers in a single quarter, while the opposing coach just silently points up to the final scoreboard.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You know what I mean? Like, the author is tallying up all these points, but they aren't actually proving that they won the overarching game.
Right. And that leaves the argument incredibly vulnerable. Skeptical viewers who might actually agree with the rival network's premise are just going to push back.
Totally. Because if I'm one of those viewers sitting at home, I might be thinking, well, sure, blowing up that specific military facility was an incredible tactical operation.
Right. Undeniably skilled pilots. Yeah.
Exactly. But does that single explosion mean we're fundamentally safer in the grand scheme of the Middle East a decade from now?
And when the script just yells, yes, it does, without explaining the causality, it hasn't actually dismantled Channel 12's argument. It's just talking over it.
Yeah, which is exactly what the rival network wants, honestly. Their argument sounds very intellectual, Tactical implies short-sightedness, while strategic sounds profound.
So to fix this, the suggestion is to fortify the argument by explicitly connecting those listed tactical successes to tangible, long-term strategic shifts in the region. You have to actively prove why the rival network's specific premise is factually incorrect.
Show the math, basically.
Exactly. Show the math. Let's give some concrete examples, and obviously these are just a few out of many possible ways to execute this. But say, look at the destruction of the proxy infrastructure. Right now, the script treats it as a standalone operational win. Instead, add a sentence detailing how the destruction fundamentally alters Iran's long-term regional strategy and changes the balance of power.
Because rebuilding a proxy network isn't just about, wiring money.
Right. It requires rebuilding decades of compromised human intelligence.
And reestablishing smuggling routes, yeah.
Exactly. It's a timeline measured in decades, not days. That's how a tactical strike becomes a strategic shift.
I love it. And you could do the same thing with the intelligence access, right? The script mentions unprecedented access over Iranian skies.
Yeah, they describe it like a science fiction movie.
Right, which is cool. But again, to bridge that gap, reframe that intelligence access not just as a standalone feat, but as a permanent strategic deterrent.
Oh, wow, yes. Because if an adversary knows every troop transfer is visible from above, it reshapes their entire diplomatic posture. They have to play defense.
Exactly. You systematically dismantle their geopolitical architecture rather than just pointing at a cool explosion. And that actually brings us naturally to the next point. Because once you establish that sophisticated strategic logic, the language and tone used to deliver it has to be equally sophisticated.
Which brings up the second key area. Relying heavily on absolute terms can inadvertently weaken a persuasive argument by making it sound purely partisan rather than objective.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
The author uses highly charged terms throughout this piece, right? They call the rival's take absurd, a desperate attempt, an academy of depression.
Yeah, very fiery language.
Right, so isn't the primary goal of a piece like this to rally the base? I mean, wouldn't dialing back those absolute terms actually weaken the emotional punch the author is clearly going for?
I get why you'd ask that. It's a super common trap. The weakness here is that utilizing binary, emotionally charged phrasing paints a picture of, we are completely right and they are completely wrong and desperate.
Which feels good to the base.
Sure, it gets a quick cheer, but this absolute approach risks alienating viewers in the middle who might be experiencing real fatigue from the war. It makes the author's valid points about military success sound like like hyperbolic cheerleading rather than a grounded assessment of reality.
Oh, I see. Because if you refuse to acknowledge any gray area, it triggers cognitive dissonance for the audience.
Exactly. The viewer is sitting there economically and emotionally exhausted, and the host is shouting that everything is an unblemished triumph. The viewer immediately tunes out because it doesn't match their lived reality.
So how do we fix that without making the script a depressing read?
The suggestion is to introduce a layer of nuanced concession. Acknowledge the heavy toll of the conflict. Paradoxically, this will make the subsequent attack on the rival network's pessimism hit much harder and feel significantly more credible.
Giving an inch to take a mile.
Precisely. Let's look at concrete examples of how to do this. First, instead of calling the rival's take an absurd agenda, reframe it as a fundamental misreading of the long-term Middle Eastern reality.
A fundamental misreading. Yeah, that sounds so much more clinical. It sounds like an expert diagnosing a problem rather than just a pundit throwing a tantrum.
Right. It elevates the host's authority instantly. Another option is to concede a minor point early on. Insert a line like, yes, this war is undeniably exhausting for the Israeli public. The toll is heavy, but...
Validating their reality before pitching your argument.
Exactly. Once you establish that empathy, your takedown of Channel 12's defeatism seems deeply objective. You become a reliable narrator.
That makes total sense. We've deepened the strategic argument, we've calibrated the tone to be more persuasive and credible, which naturally brings us to the final impression left on the viewer, the conclusion.
Right, and an impactful conclusion leaves the audience with a distinct, thought-provoking framework tailored to the piece, rather than a familiar historical cliché.
Yeah, looking at the current ending, it feels a bit disconnected from the specific media criticism that drove the whole script.
Because the weakness here is that the ending leans on a highly generic, almost cinematic trope. They say something like, history will remember those who made the impossible reality, not those who explained why success is a failure.
Which, I mean, sounds great with some swelling music behind it.
It does. It's emotionally resonant, but it entirely misses the opportunity to tie back to the core theme of the piece. The whole script is about the stark contrast between television media framing and actual operational reality.
Yeah, you could take that history will remember ending and slap it onto a script about, I don't know, building a suspension bridge or a sports movie.
Exactly. It's safe and familiar. So the suggestion here is to anchor the final thought directly in the specific friction between media narrative and physical reality. Give the audience a much sharper, tailored takeaway about how they should consume the news moving forward.
Make it specific to this exact dynamic. So what would be a concrete way to do that, just as a conceptual springboard?
Well, instead of talking about how history judges things, conclude by explicitly contrasting the environment. Contrast the temporary, fleeting noise of television studio panels with the permanent, deafening silence of degraded Iranian military sites.
Oh, wow, that sensory juxtaposition is incredible. You're forcing the viewer to visualize the brightly lit, safe TV studio next to the dark, ruined reality of the tactical success.
Right. It physically manifests the poor argument. Another example would be ending with a direct challenge to the viewer. Ask them to consciously make a choice.
Like a call to action?
Kind of, yeah. Have the script ask them to choose between trusting the orchestrated panic on a television screen or trusting the unprecedented operational results actually happening in the skies.
I like that a lot. It gives the viewer homework. It empowers them to watch the news differently tomorrow morning.
Exactly. The goal isn't just to complain about a rival network, it's to fundamentally change how your audience processes information.
It's really fascinating how deeply interconnected all these tweaks are, you know? Like, you bridge the tactical and strategic gap at the start, which requires a more credible tone in the middle, which demands a tailored conclusion at the end to seal it all together.
Right. It's all about ensuring the rhetorical architecture is as robust as the military operations they're describing. And the author clearly has the passion and the grasp of the source material to pull this off.
Absolutely. The momentum is already there. So just to briefly recap the actionable suggestions for the listener to implement today. First, explicitly bridge the gap between tactical wins and strategic shifts to actively prove why the rival's claim is wrong.
Show the math.
Exactly. Second, swap out some of those absolute partisan terms for grounded nuance. Introduce that early concession to build credibility and empathy.
Because empathy is the quickest path to rhetorical authority.
Well said. And third, rewrite the final cliché. Ditch the generic history will remember trope and anchor the conclusion in the specific contrast between television narratives and physical reality.
Challenge the audience.
Exactly. We warmly invite the listener to take these structural edits, apply them to the piece, and submit the revised material back in for another critique.
It takes a lot of vulnerability to put your work out there, but these edits will really elevate the script.
It's always a privilege to see how these pieces evolve. The raw passion is a phenomenal starting point, and with these adjustments, it'll become an unshakable strategic argument.